Welcome to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I am your co-host, Josh, a.k.a. Tiger Cub, and I'm joined by Mark, a.k.a. Bear.
What the hell? Okay, let's do this. We are going to be discussing Night Watch, an awesome Russian. I guess it falls into horror because that's what we do here.
That's up for debate.
So, Night Watch is a Russian movie based on a book series, a fantasy series. You got your Night Watch, which is like mages and magicians, and they are watching the Dark Ones, which are the Day Watch, which are overseeing the mages, and they're a bunch of like vampires and stuff like that. And it takes place in modern Russia. It is a very grimy and dirty movie. It just has that feel to it, but it revolves around Anton, who discovers he's one of the Light Ones, joins the Night Watch, and events leading across two movies, Night Watch and Day Watch, which we'll talk about in a later episode. And they're tracking a little kid, and it's all part of a big prophecy leading to it's supposed to lead to a giant war and stuff. So, yeah, that's the basic breakdown without major spoilers.
I think you explained this movie so much better than the actual movie did. So the joke that caught Mark off guard, as in our introductions, is there are two characters that are shapeshifters in this movie, and they are Bear and Tiger Cub. And this movie, let me just say,
I missed that.
Let me just say that this movie is so hard to place into words. It is both.
It's nuts. It's a crazy movie. It's very early 2000s. I think 2004.
Yeah, it's 2004.
But it has that 90s movie feel to it, and it's like backwater. Well, not so much backwater, but rundown city portions of like Moscow and St. Petersburg. It's just very gritty and grimy. And I love the movie. It may take a couple watches to kind of catch everything and pick it up, but it's an extremely interesting take on like supernatural fantasy vampire stories.
See, that's the thing about this, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but this movie is very much a product of its time. Like, it feels like 2004 just so much, and it has that, like you said, like grimy feel to it. I was listening to a podcast of the Dams episode on this movie, and a portion of their show, they like to read off letterbox reviews, and this one just said this movie is meth personified. And I can't escape that because, dear God, that is like, never has there ever been a more accurate representation of what a movie is than this. This movie also feels like it exists in 2004, but it's also past, present, and future. So it feels like the past, like it has, like Mark said, like it has like this like 90s feel to it. All of the CGI very much feels like 2004, like product of its time. And then it's got this like whole like ahead of its time thing where it, you know, there was this weird thing that happened in like 2012 with the Avengers, and the Avengers like spawned off this giant trend for like the original Suicide Squad, I think BVS at one point, like a lot of like the other superhero movies where they just had giant like rings of light and like terror things that would just happen in the sky, and lots of debris would follow. In this case, it's crows. But this movie predates all of that. So that's what I mean by it's ahead of its time. But that's a very minute detail because this movie has so many storylines going into it. It does not feel like a movie format suffices everything that this movie is trying to, all the plot holes and plot stories that this movie is trying to tell.
Well, like I said, it's based on like a 6-book series. There's 6 books to the whole series overall, and Night Watch is the first of the bunch. You've also kind of got to remember that it's a Russian-produced movie. It's not a big-budget Hollywood. So, considering that, they did a fairly good job with it. Sure, there's plot holes, but what movie doesn't have them these days? And they're trying to trim down some of the storylines from the books, which I've never read, but my wife has, because that's how I get away with playing video games all the time, and she likes to read. And this is one of those movies. Okay, so I love the movies. This was my choice for us to check it out. I'd been pushing for a while, and you finally gave in. And I think it's a cool movie. But it's one of those movies that I feel like Hollywood needs to do a Harry Potter style push to remake it, where Harry Potter was all based in the UK with UK actors, UK sets, whole 9 yards. I really feel like if they pushed and did this in Russia with Russian actors on Russian sets in a similar manner, they could put it together in a series of movies to make it friggin' amazing. But they didn't have that budget in Russia. So we ended up with what we got, which I find quite amusing myself. So
just to kind of give listeners a grand overarching picture of Mark and I's like conversation on how we create and craft our recording schedule and like what movies we're going to cover. Mark has been pushing for this since we were like in the early stages of planning the podcast. So long before The Wicker Man, and I don't remember the first episode we did.
Wicker Man was the first one.
No, Wicker Man was episode 2. We did something else. Yeah, we did something else for the first one. Oh, we did Ghoulies for the first one. So long.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Long before Ghoulies and Wicker Man ever entered into the picture, Mark's like, you have to check out this movie. Let me just say this too. I've never had a movie experience where I've wanted to watch another movie that is slightly better but still kind of. It's not a sequel. It is. Dude, this movie made me want to watch Underworld so hard. Like,
oh, okay.
Like, I just got like you talk about like the griminess that this movie has. Like, this movie made me want to watch Underworld so much better. Because, like you said, like, and I guess we'll get into spoilers. So the movie opens up on this like old like medieval like bridge. And it's telling the story of how, like, the mythos of this world. And the mythos of this world is basically, like, there are the guys in the light, guys in the day, both have leaders. And they come upon this, like, they basically try to fight. And then when they find out that they're equally matched, they kind of, like, have this... the
leader of the light ones... basically stops the war because he's the one that realizes they're just going to kill each other off.
Yeah, but I say all of that to say this is because it kind of sets up this like, you know, good versus evil, light versus dark, cinematic, just overarching story that we get throughout the rest of the movie. It's what sets the pace for the majority of the characters that we follow in this movie.
Yeah, it does. It gives you your basis of it. And Night Watch actually goes into detail as to how the Dark Ones came about in the first place. I don't know if you caught that because this is your first time watching it.
I did catch that,
Okay.
but I said all of that summarization to say that like it made me want to watch Underworld so much because it's a movie I grew up with. Kate Beckinsale looks good in leather, and
of course,
but also too like that the Lycans versus the vampires, or the vampires versus Lycans is such a great overarching story, and I feel like they did a really good job at like, if this movie does a decent job at like setting everything up in the beginning, and then by the time it gets to modern day, everything falls apart. It's like it has such a good hook, but just it does not like stick the landing. Like there's so much that happens within this film, and like I understand like it's an adaptation. Like no adaptation's ever going to be perfect, and you're never 100% of the time going to be able to get every single detail. But they jam so much into this 2-hour storyline with our protagonist Anton. He basically like when it comes to present day, like he basically wakes up in this like, I don't know, like he just like meth fever dream, because like he's like top to bottom like sweaty. Like I actually wrote in my notes, like there's a scene in the very end of the movie where he's like still sweaty, and I'm like, why is this guy always so sweaty?
So so the beginning of the movie, well, the next sequence after what you were talking about on the bridge, you've got Anton has gone to like this witch that deals in black magic because his girlfriend's pregnant. It's not his kid, and he wants things to work out. So he makes a deal with this witch, and that's his introduction to essentially the world of magic. She casts a couple spells to get the girlfriend back interested, and starts to cast one to make her lose the baby. And that's when you get introduced to the Night Watch. They show up to kind of stop the spell where they've been following him and essentially using him as bait. And the Night Watch and Day Watch have this long-standing, centuries-old truce, but it's always very thinly held together at the very best. The Dark Ones, the Day Watch is always picking at the Night Watch to kind of try to break it. And they talk about that with a character in the movie called Olga. They kind of caused an incident that they made him think they were going after the guy in charge of Night Watch, but they were really after Olga. Her character was the one that started off as like a stuffed owl.
It's a weird decision, but okay. I'll allow it.
That was, I think for me, that's part of the fun, is the weird magic and stuff that they do in the movie. And that's one of them. Was her punishment was she was essentially turned into a stuffed owl.
And this also
like taxidermied owl, not like a stuffed animal, but like a taxidermied owl. And when she comes out later, she's got all the scars of the taxidermy and stuff all over her.
This also dawned on me too that another way that this movie is ahead of its time is that the protagonist, as I said, Anton, when we first meet him, we meet him in Moscow, 1992. He looks like the lead singer from Oasis.
Yeah, he was kind of doofy looking.
He's got like the long like emo-ish hair, which I would have been okay with the movie taking place in 1992. I kind of didn't need to see this like interaction between like his realization that he's a quote another, which I guess, can we explain kind of what another is? Because like this movie is like ridiculously vague about what another is. It's like if you just don't fit into like the light, and if you don't fit into the dark, you are considered another. And another just basically feels like such a generic term.
So, as part of the truce, okay, and this plays into what you're asking, as part of the truce, it's made very clear between both sides that they are not allowed to have any interaction to influence an other to pick this side. An other is basically a person with some sort of supernatural propensity, whether it be towards magic, shape shifting, anything like that. So they have to make up their mind on their own which side they want to be on. They're not allowed to be, hey, little kid, I have cookies, come with me. They're not allowed to do that. It's part of the truce. But an other is a person with those abilities outside of the normal human realm.
Oh, you got cookies?
Not right now, but give me an hour.
All right. I mean, it'll take me about that long to make it down to you anyways.
But
so
that's what an other is. And sometimes it takes an event. In Anton's case, it's the events of the black magic and everything at the beginning that I mentioned, that they find out that, hey, he's an other. He has abilities of some sort. And that event is what triggered it, that they realized it, because he was able to see the Night Watch in the gloom without any sort of help, and they realize he's an other that hasn't chosen a side. So.
And Anton is specifically a seer who he's able to see these visions of the future, which is really cool. And I'm for as much as I crap on this movie, there are a few things that I did enjoy about it, but overall I'm just kind of like, But Anton being able to see the future and have visions of it, kind of like everything where his son left off, like that is the reason that I want to dive into Day Watch, because I want to see how these events that are set up in Night Watch actually play off. Now, I know that originally they were supposed to do a trilogy with these movies, and it ended up only being a duology. But
yeah,
I actually want to know if you knew this or not. So one of the things that I found out in listening to other podcasts on this is that they are currently trying to do a reboot of this in America.
Of Night Watch?
Of Night Watch.
Yes. And hopefully they do it like I said earlier. They do it in Russia with Russian actors instead of Brad Pitt trying to be Russian.
Oh, if it gets made it will be a American release. So more than likely it'll be American. And it's a Disney movie now, just so you know.
Oh, son of a bitch. So they are trying. Who's behind it? I know you're saying it's a Disney movie, but Disney owns so many studios now.
I have no idea. The copy that I own it on Blu-ray, and we mentioned that this is a 2004 film. It didn't actually find its way to the States until 2006 because rights are weird. So this, when it eventually came to America, was actually released under Fox. Searchlight, which was a subsidiary of 20th Century Fox, which is now owned by Disney.
Okay, so it's that makes sense then.
Yeah,
that would make sense because that's how they're putting out Deadpool 3 and keeping it R-rated.
Yeah,
they're not doing it through Marvel and Disney; they're doing it through Fox, I think.
Yeah, so I think we've jumped around so much of this movie, and this movie is just absolutely bananas. Absolutely bananas, and I don't want to just jumping randomly, so where would you like to start with Night Watch, because this is your movie?
So the movie is crazy and kind of jumps around a lot. We've gotten the intro out of the way and the kind of background behind the movie. There is one scene in the opening. I like the way they introduced and did the truce, where you saw the two leaders come together and start whispering in the human's ear.
Yeah, I like I said, the little bit of this movie that I feel like is done really well is the truce prologue and the 92 Moscow scene. Like, those two factors right there set this movie up to be a really awesome film. And then once we get into Anton actually in present day, and he's kind of like swimming in a pool of his own sweat, that's where the movie kind of gets weird for me and kind of like loses me, because there's so many different arcs that he is just so involved with at that point.
Well, he's your main character. Anton's your main character all the way around. The story starts with him. You see him learn that he's an other, but it also plays into the events of the overall story. We did mention spoilers, right?
Yes.
Okay. So in the process, one of the things he does is hunt vampires that are breaking their licensing and breaking the rules of the truce. And in the process, he gets called in to hunt a kid he's wandering aimlessly, almost like he's in a daze. Anything people say to him, he takes it as like direct orders, all kinds of weird stuff. And you find out that it's actually the kid that he tried to get rid of earlier in the movie. So he's tied to the kid. They even refer to him as the kid's dad, which I found a little odd because they said at another point it wasn't his kid earlier in the movie.
Yeah. If I was just going to interject for a second, I will say, I will give the movie that credit. Like, that was something that I didn't see, like, that truly threw me off, because like you had mentioned, like, it is revealed that, like, he is not Jaeger. Am I saying that right? Igor? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it pronounced Igor?
If you're Russian and listening to this podcast, we apologize. We can't pronounce half this stuff. So, our bad.
Yeah, so his son is revealed to be, like, in the prologue, is revealed to be the son of another guy that, like, his wife ends up, like, cheating on him with. And then you end up having like, it's revealed that, like, his son, like, this kid is actually the son, which I thought was cool. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like, it did get me. I will give credit to it there. But there's so much of this movie that, like, I had questions about, like, specifically, like, what makes Anton like this, like, so special, like, this, like, awesome bounty hunter. And, like, I feel like they
part of it.
Go ahead.
Part of it is him being a seer and his visions. He doesn't have control over what he sees, but it does allow him to figure some of this stuff out. Like, he's on his way to meet, I think the kid's name was Yegor. And he's on his way to try to find him and some vampires that are calling him. And you run into the first kind of real appearance of who they call was the Byzantine Virgin, which was part of the prophecy they talk about, and part of the story behind how the Dark Ones came about. But you run into her for the first time as well, while he's going to find this kid who turns out to be his son, and he doesn't know it. He's not aware that this is his kid. Because I guess as part of the backstory, when he figured out that he's one of the others and joined the Night Watch, he kind of cut ties with his girlfriend and everything.
Okay. Yeah, see, like, you trying to explain it, like, again, this movie is overtly complicated. But yeah, so, like, I also don't understand, like, the whole, like, it's the whole thing of, like, needing to, like, have, like, a kid be, like, the center of this, like, prophecy that's going to, like, be the one that's going to challenge this ancient truce. I don't know. To me, that kind of felt like, I don't want to say a little bit forced, but just tiresome, because, like, that's something we've seen in film for so many times before.
Yeah, so part of the prophecy is that the kid is supposed to be like this uber wizard or whatever, and if he chooses to go with the side of light, he's supposed to bring about peace. If he chooses to go with the side of dark, then he's basically going to annihilate everything. And
So Star Wars.
kind of, yeah. And that's his role in the whole prophecy, is he's basically both sides are fighting over him. And you have the side of light trying to kind of almost defend him and take care of him in a way, while the side of dark is trying to manipulate everybody and play the kid into getting him on their side without directly influencing him, manipulating the events around him as opposed to trying to manipulate him directly.
Yeah. Okay. I will say though that I never realized that Dracula ever made it into Buffy until this movie, because I fell off hard with Buffy, and I kind of perked up. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, oh, I should probably seek this out and watch this whole episode, because I like the idea of Buffy the Vampire Slayer meeting Dracula.
Yeah, that little guest spot.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So one of the things I like is the way they did some of the character designs and abilities. Like the dark ones could fade in and out of the gloom at will.
You have to actually explain what the gloom is, because like the gloom is like, I describe it as like vampire purgatory, where like there are certain people and with abilities that can enter in, but not everyone can enter in. Does that make sense?
It is. It's like what they call it in Stranger Things, the other dimension.
Yeah, the Upside Down.
Yeah, it's almost like that. But the farther you go into it, the more influence it has, and the dark ones, it doesn't carry much weight on because of who they are, vampires and stuff like that. They can fade in and out of it at will. The light ones, the Night Watch, they have to do certain things. They've got like glasses, and there's a lot of little things like that needed better explanation. I've just watched the movie enough times to realize that this is what's going on. But like they put on the glasses and they can fade into the gloom. And there's different levels of the gloom, and the farther into it you go, the more of an influence it has on them, so they may not be able to come back out. Mosquitoes is a big part of it. There's apparently a whole lot of mosquitoes in the gloom.
Well, so the way that I took it as is like that's how the other, or not the other world, but like how the outside world sees the gloom, is that like in this version of mythology, vampires don't have like, it's not that they don't have like reflections, it's actually that vampires, when they're in this world, when they're in the gloom, they just disappear completely. And so like to kind of keep where their point of reference is, when they go into the gloom, the outside world and those outside of the gloom, all they see is a lot of mosquitoes. So that's why you have those shots.
So when they fade in and out, kind of the mosquitoes come with them in and out of the gloom. They infest the gloom. But when the vampires fade into the gloom, they go essentially invisible. It's almost like another dimension of reality. But they can still see the reflection in the mirrors. So during the fight scene, when they first show him fighting with the vampires over the little kid, you can see him fade away, but you can see his reflection in the mirrors around him. And that's how Anton has to fight him, is by the reflections in the mirrors and try to catch him as he comes out of the gloom.
Which was such a cool sequence. The way that is like framed and shot, and it's such a great idea too. I really enjoyed that scene. But one of the things that makes this movie, like one of the many things that makes this movie so just bonkers bananas to me, is that they so like, all right, obviously by now we've seen enough different versions of vampires to know how each one, like the basics, like vampires can't be seen, well they can, they just don't have a reflection, a stake in the heart is how they die, they can't be around garlic, holy water, crosses, like religious objects. All of that is like kind of like the basics and the crux of what we know about vampires. And then you have different versions of those where you have like the steampunk kind of like almost like BDSM ones from Underworld. You have those that sparkle in Twilight, and these vampires make literally no sense. Like, there are certain things that happen in this movie that happen once, it's never explained, and it never happens again. There's one point where a vampire actually uses X-ray, and I'm like, when did this happen? When was this established? Like, the thing that's so frustrating to me about Night Watch is that there are rules established in the beginning of its mythology and like how these creatures of the night operate, and the rest of the movie acts like for the second half of the first act to the rest of the movie do not obey that at all.
So there's a lot in the movie that's not explained. And I think that's part of what's causing you the issue.
Look, yes, but I will also say that, like, much like I argued for Dune in my review last month, is that if you're going to make a movie that is an adaptation, I shouldn't have to read the source material to understand the film that you're trying to make.
Well, yeah, that's a given. So that's what I said. There's little things that needed more explaining, and I've seen the movies a few times, both Night Watch and Day Watch, that some of the stuff makes sense to me that you're like, what? The X-ray, I'm trying to remember the X-ray scene you're talking about with the vampire, but I've seen that. I've seen that kind of thing in a multitude of movies over the years with vampires, seeing like the X-ray of the circulatory system and stuff.
I'm pretty sure the scene that I like wrote down in my notes is the scene where Igor, Tiger Cub, and Bear are having a conversation, and like I'm pretty sure it's Bear that uses the X-ray, and I was just like so confused because I'm like, I don't remember this ever actually being established, but okay, I'll run with it. Also, let's talk about this whole thing. So we've established that Anton is basically a bounty hunter, and his assignment is basically to go get his son so that like the bad guys don't. And okay, like that's the crux of like what he is spending the majority of the movie doing. And there's this subway scene where I guess, man, like I can't even talk about the subway scene because I have to like deconstruct his like whole thing before I can actually get into it. So like he's got this like flashlight that's supposed to be like his like weapon of choice, and it's not a normal flashlight. Like it can blind and hurt vampires, but also at the same time, like it can see through the gloom. Mm-hmm. Am I explaining that right?
Yeah.
And so he's on this like subway, and he's like getting ready to get like his son, and then like a mob of people come up, and so he's like trying to like reconnect to his son, and he ends up shining this like flashlight, and he's freaking out like just someone like on a bad trip. And he's like going towards it, and then there's just like this woman that like the light makes eye contact with, and she's got this like Marilyn Monroe moment where like her hair just goes every which way and it's looking all like seductive, and like he just starts screaming at her, and then it comes back in, and like I don't feel like they ever properly explained like why this random person like comes into the movie, but she has like a few scenes with Anton, and she's kind of like the source of like what makes this weird crow vortex machine in the middle that just shuts off all of Moscow.
So she is a major part of the prophecy. She's basically a reincarnation of the Byzantine Virgin. The Byzantine Virgin was cursed, and it got so bad it formed like what they call it, a vortex of, was it Vortex of Doom or something like that?
Look, Vortex of Doom just sounds incredibly cheesy, but I wouldn't put it past this movie. They just kept referring to it as Vortex.
Yeah. There was an exact name for it, and I just can't remember it off the top of my head. But she was cursed. Everything got so bad. It was like if she petted a puppy, the puppy would die. If she talked to you, you would die. Stuff like that. And it turned into this vortex. The vortex exploded and created the first Dark Ones. Okay. And the prophecy is that this kid's going to come through. There's going to be another vortex and everything. The kid's going to show up, and that kid's going to decide whether he's light or dark and influences the final war and breaks treaty. And the appearance of the Byzantine Virgin is kind of the beginning of that whole series of events to the end of the prophecy. So he has a vision in the subway and thinks she's a vampire. He throws on his goggles to go into the gloom and hit the vampire with the magic flashlight, so to speak. And the light bulbs are essentially different types of crystals to project magic, is what they are, basically. And nothing happens. He just sees her hair swirling and realizes it's a human, and I saw a vortex. That's what that whole thing was. That was her introduction and the introduction of the vortex and the beginning of the prophecy of the final events.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, like another thing too that like this movie is very much a product of its time. So like when you go back and you watch certain movies within like the first like 5 years of the new millennium, I'll say, they had this tendency to be shot very quickly, like just quick cuts, and also at the same time to be very like fast paced. And this spans from, you know, action movies to comedies, to horror movies like this one. And they very much, when you get to the end, they very much feel like a fever dream. And this movie does do that in spades.
Oh, it's insane. It's crazy. I never said it was a sane horror movie.
Yeah, no, I actually wrote in my letterbox review for this thing that I was like, I got to like nauseum at like certain points in this movie because like the quick cuts are just so quick. Like, it's weird to describe because this movie doesn't feel like a horror movie to me. It has horror elements into it, but it's largely an action movie. And the reason that I say that is because like there's so many like choreographed like legitimate action scenes in this. I'm not going to take away, like, this just seems like Russia's answer to The Matrix.
Yeah, and it had if The Matrix had vampires kind of thing. I mean, the movie series Night Watch and Day Watch did well enough that, I mean, the director did get to do Want It for Hollywood. So it couldn't have been that bad.
That's fine with me. Like I've said in previous episodes, not just for Abyss Gazing, but also for like That's High Praise or Victims and Villains, or like any of the guest appearances I've done and over podcasting in the last 3 or 4 years has been like, not every movie is going to be made for me. Not every movie there are going to be certain movies that I encounter, whether I'm covering it for us or for someone else, that are going to be made for someone else in mind, that I'm not the target audience for this. And out of all the international countries that I've seen a lot of horror movies for, like, French is definitely like France is definitely my favorite, and Russia always kind of seems, for whatever reason, to just kind of be like my least favorite. I've never come across a Russian horror movie or any movie in Russia that I actually enjoy. And this movie continues in that tradition, so I'm sorry to any Russian listener we may have.
I would suggest, because like we said, we're going to cover Day Watch 2 at a later date. My suggestion would be watch it again now that you know more about the story, more about the details you had questions about, and rewatch it. Lots of it will make more sense, and it might be a better movie to you. I've watched it a multitude of times. That's why I can explain most everything to you that's going on, because I've seen it so many times. And my wife has read the book, so there's little details. She's like, oh, that's what this is. Oh, that's what that is, that I didn't pick up. So rewatch it now that you've know more about some of these scenes you hadn't questioned, and see if it makes more sense.
I'm willing to give any film a second try, and sometimes I am proven wrong. We did when Victims and Villains did Jennifer's Body earlier this year. Like, that had been a movie that I largely hated for the better part of 10 years, and revisiting it, I went on record and said, like, I love this movie. It's been one of my favorite movies to revisit. I rewatched it just a couple weeks ago.
Jennifer's Body is great.
It's a great movie. We might be doing something with it next year. You never know.
And it seems like part of this movie too, why you might not like it, is I tend to like some of the weirder stuff, the like far out there stuff, like the original Wicker Man, stuff like that.
I'm not gonna say that like I absolutely hated this movie. This movie just. The story that they are trying to tell just doesn't seem suited for a cinematic format. This movie definitely seems like it needs to have like a limited series to tell all of the stories talking about. You talk about, like, you brought up Stranger Things earlier. Like, had they tried to tell any of those seasons in a 2-hour block, that would have been a mess, because there's the more and more that series goes on, the more complex and complicated those storylines become. And so if you were to take something like season 3 of Stranger Things and be like, all right, we're gonna condense this to a 2-hour movie, it would just be atrocious. And I think that that's kind of the way that I feel about Night Watch, is that if you were to take it and make it a 6 to 8 episode like limited series, I think it would flow magnificently, and I'd be all for it. And so if they are going to reboot it, I really hope that that's the route they take.
I think if they did something like that, yes, or took a better approach at the writing of it and the way they cut certain storylines and manipulated storylines for a movie, if they kind of did that a little bit better, because again, we don't know the process involved in making a movie in general, let alone one in the middle of Russia. And anytime you manipulate those stories, you can end up causing confusion. So maybe if they had some better writers to condense everything down and make it more coherent, it would make a little bit more sense for some people. But I'm not going to give up on the movie. I still like it.
That's fine. That's fine. I stand by, my own crap fests, like Showgirls.
Oh God!
I'm looking at the VHS right now. I don't know where my DVD copy is, but I own it on both VHS and DVD. And if they ever decide to re-release it on Blu-ray, I'll have it on that too. But I digress. So it's really hard it was really hard, like when I was thinking and mapping out like how I wanted to talk specifically about the mental health angle of this, because there's a lot that goes on. But I think that, and I'm curious to kind of like hear your thoughts on this, is like the film is set up in the beginning, the truce. So you have this truce that is set up between the light and the dark. And anyone can join their sides of free will. So like that's the kicker, is like I can choose to be, and I've established this on the show, like I choose as a man to be a Christian. Like I've made that free will choice to follow God and to hold to certain religious convictions and lifestyle choices. That's fine. Then there are people out there that don't, and that's fine too. However, what I'm saying is like the end where the Blade Runner looking dude gives this who pulls a spine who pulls a sword out of his spine, which is the best scene in the whole freaking movie. He says, everyone who is destined to drown will drown. Everyone who is destined to fall off a roof will fall. So he's setting up that this boy is Yeager is basically set up to be this great figure within this war.
Right.
But does that somehow, if you're destined for an office, does that necessarily mean that like you've been robbed of free will?
Now you're getting into a big question. Is free will a real thing, or is destiny a real thing? Which is it? If destiny exists, then does free will not exist because destiny overrides free will?
So that's the thing, though. Go ahead.
So, which is it? He can make a comment like that all day long, but there's not really any way to say one way or the other, because the whole movie is set up for the dark side to manipulate events to bring the kid to the dark side. So he's a product of the world around him and making his own choice based on the information he's given. Free will, yes, maybe. He made the decision, but it was also prophesized and foretold. So that's which came first, the chicken or the egg?
So that's the thing too, is that I'm going to bring in some of my own experience here, and I'm going to put a preface on this and say that my experiences and what I believe have shaped my lifestyle over the last 10 years. I'm not meaning to come across preachy or derogatory towards anyone, but I'm going to sound like people might think that I'm a little bit crazy what I'm going to say. So I just want to throw that out there. I lost a friend of mine when I was to suicide when I was 17, and at that point in my life, I had basically kind of walked away from the church, and I had also been like struggling in my own depression, and like had also contemplated my own suicide. And so like weeks before, like months before actually, he had taken his own life. I had kind of like, I'd re-given myself to, I'd recommitted my life to God. And, you know, I was in this weird in between where I was like trying to like process like what I believe in certain things. And so, one of the things that I had numerous people tell me after a year after Adam had died was, you're going to be a preacher. And I was like, I don't want that. Like very much similar to the way that Yeager is told throughout the course of the film, like you're this great linchpin for this war. I ran, and so you know, obviously I didn't stay away, because now I do speaking engagements where I preach, you know, biblical truth and application and how it correlates to mental health. But I say all of that to say this is that I use that as an example because, you know, I can have someone tell me that I have this destiny, but my free will comes in a line when I choose to align myself with that destiny or that, quote, pre-calling before, or I can also have that free will to turn my back on it and have nothing to do with it.
So how much of that decision, though, to go that route was based on your previous life experience of being in the church, as well as almost the subconscious belief that this is what I'm supposed to do from the people telling you that, hey, you're going to be a preacher?
It's a little bit of both, because I will say that I didn't always have the greatest experience growing up in the church. There were a lot of hurts that I had and hurdles that I experienced along the way, and I didn't want to align myself with those hurdles and hurts. I didn't want anyone else, kind of like this that Batman syndrome. Like I didn't want anyone else to go through what I had experienced. Where like, you know, if you know, what the Bible preaches, you know, says is true about how God is love. And, you know, if, you know, no one can see God, you know, First John talks about if no one sees God, right? But like, if you're going to claim to be of God, then you need to love your neighbor as God does, because, you know, that's how you effectively love people. And I just wasn't seeing that. So it took kind of, you know, I've always talked about this in speaking engagements and on this podcast too, is like when you lose someone to suicide, it's different than losing anyone to any other form of death, because suicide kind of, it leaves you with this otherworldly hurt that just kind of places into perspective about like how fragile life is. And like, yes, we all already know like how fragile life is. And so I think had I not experienced the death of a friend by suicide and some of the hurdles along the way within the church and my own faith, I don't know necessarily that I would be here kind of having this conversation with you today. So I think it's a mixture of both, what you asked.
So does it go back to destiny or does it go back to choice? Which was it?
I think originally, you know, I think originally it starts out as destiny, but if you have some of the experiences that I've had, eventually that destiny eventually ends up becoming choice, if that makes sense.
You did this to me the other week. I just want you to
know. I know.
You put me on the spot the other week.
I know, and I have no problem answering that, you know. But I also think that... Go ahead, sorry.
So, okay, I grew up in a church as well. My dad was a minister of music for a little while, always taught Sunday school. We were at church multiple times a week, pretty much all day on Sunday, all that stuff. I grew to hate the church with a passion for a multitude of reasons. Everything revolved around the church. Everybody that I knew pretty much involved in church, super judgmental. And you just heard everybody talking about everybody else constantly. So when I got old enough, I pretty much left the church and never went back for my own reasons. That was part of it. Did you ever explore anything outside of the church?
Like other religions, you mean?
Yeah. Anything like atheism, paganism?
I did, actually, for a little while. And, one of the things that I talked about during our coverage of this year's Genre Blast was a beautiful documentary on the booming Jehovah's Witness scene. And so, like, I won't say like I ever like converted, but I investigated a lot into like Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness, and also like Satanism and paganism. Like I deep dove into things. And so like I was probably in my mid-20s, and I spent probably about a year and a half just diving into like different religions and stuff like that, and kind of other variations on Christianity, and kind of seeing it, because most religions, from what I've found, have a basis of Christianity, or they use it as a foundation or a bedrock to kind of shape and mold how they're going to do their own church.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
So, and I'm probably going to piss off a lot of people, a lot of what we see in modern Christianity is cannibalized paganism and heathenism. And it was done by the Catholic Church to make the transition easier for the heathens. So you have similar things like Christmas, for example. The Christmas tree or Yule tree is originally a pagan symbol. It was part of a pagan tradition. Same thing with parts of the things we do for Easter, things like that. So when you're finding those bases and similarities, that's probably why. And I get crap for saying that from a lot of Christians, but that's the history of it. So I spent a lot of time in some pagan groups, and it was more about, it seemed to be more about doing good around you than focusing on, with like Christianity, focusing on your relationship with God. There was still the judgment, just like with any religion or just any group of people in general. But for me, for that period of time, it was a lot more easier to relate to, or at least some aspects of it. Maybe not all of it for me, but some aspects and the people. But I went away from that over the years and kind of do my own thing now.
Yeah,
But-
like what I was gonna say is that, you know, I feel like when you're talking about specifically about the majority of how churches operate, like you talk about, like you'd mentioned kind of like, you know, you're so many like denominations focusing on like how quote good you are, or like how much sin you have in your life, versus like actually like focusing on your relationship with God. Like I feel like that's a whole nother podcast that honestly like we could spend time talking about, because like I think it's always really interesting when people like think that they hear that I'm a Christian, and they're like, they have this expectation in their mind that I don't really fit the part because I watch horror movies, because I specifically like when I do like have conversations about like religion and the gospel, it's in horror settings. When I have tattoos, I listen to heavy metal, I wear eyeliner, I paint my nails, like I wear skin tight shirts and clothes. Like I just don't fit the quote model Christian. And that's fine, because Jesus still loves me, and Jesus still loves us and accepts us for, you know, who we are. And, you know, but I digress, because, you know, I also equally have my own problems with how the church does stuff. And I would also like to recommend to listeners to check out our Eyes of Tammy Faye episode that we did for 400 episodes back in September for Victims and Villains, because, like, you know, televangelism and kind of like some of that stuff we got into a little bit better here. But I think it's interesting when you're talking in the grand scheme of things, as far as like, you know, free will versus destiny, because whether you believe in destiny or, you know, whatever, you, like Mark said, like it's, you know, what came first, you know, free will or destiny. There's mental health involved in either or, because I feel like one of the things that for me, like hearing someone tell me, oh, you're going to be this like pastor, or in Igor's case, you're going to be this great figure in this war, that has so much mental health roots that come into it, because it almost kind of feels like everything that you're going to do, you have to be great at. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case. And so I wanted to ask you, like, even like being, you know, the son of someone that was like a minister of music and a Sunday school teacher, like, did you ever feel that growing up, to where like you felt like you had to, because your father figure was such a prominent role in the church, did you ever feel like you had to like be a certain way, and like you had to be like on your best behavior or something?
I was always very combative in general, so the pressure just pushed me away from it. Simply because you're not going to tell me what I need to be or who I should be. I'll figure it out on my own. So that's kind of how I reacted to the whole thing. Everybody knows my family in the area. That's my thing. Part of it's from the church, part of it's from the family business. So I always felt like I couldn't get away with anything in general. Because everybody knew my family, and it got back to my family one way or another. So that kind of sucked.
Yeah, I mean, but like you're talking about, like everything got back. So like you felt like there's an element almost, it sounds like in your story, like that you feel like you couldn't necessarily be who you are. Because I'll be honest, like there are certain members of my family, and my wife knows this, that like I feel like I can't be myself around them, because again, they have this expectation, and like it's really actually hindered some of the way that like I actually end up really like having relationships and conversations with those individuals.
At first, yeah. For a little while, yes. I agree with that. But after a little while, it just it kind of turned into I'm going to be me, whether it makes anyone else happy or not. Mine opinions are mine, and I don't give a crap if you don't like them. It's my opinion, and it ultimately ended up becoming almost, I guess, almost very abrasive in a manner.
How dare you?
I'm very straightforward and very blunt with things. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I quit worrying about what everybody else was worried about that I was doing. Is he into this? Why is he doing that? All that crap. I quit worrying about it. And it turned into I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to be who I want to be. And that's that. You could say what you want, but ultimately, crap on it. It's my decision.
Yeah, I feel like at the end of the day, like, you have to do what makes you happy. And, like, I talked about this earlier, like, running away from the you're going to be a pastor path. I'm still not a legal pastor. I don't run a church. I mean, I can marry people and bury people. That's about it. And I'm perfectly content with that. But you know, I also too like had this like reached this point where like I kind of don't care what people think about it anymore. And so like I am comfortable, you know, being the weirdo. Like I love that scene from The Craft where they all get off the bus and the bus driver is just like, you know, be on guard for the weirdos, and without a beat, Nancy just looks at him and just goes, "We are the weirdos, mister." And like that to me is like that's a mantra. Like I can 100% relate to that because like that's how I feel. And at the end of the day, like I think you need to allow free will to trump over that destiny card, because it's going to give you better peace of mind, and it's going to make your mental health be better. Because like what Mark and I are saying is that like we spent very brief periods of time in our lives kind of chasing after the opinions and validations of others, and ultimately ended up realizing that we're never going to make everyone happy. And so as long as we're happy, that's fine.
Yeah, pretty much. And depending on how you put that persona forward, it can make things easier, but it can also make things more difficult for you as well. When other people realize that their opinion is no longer important or have much, if any, influence, they can get kind of nasty with you. So that's the downside of it. And a lot of that with me is just because of how almost harshly blunt I can be and am at times. So
Mark holds nothing back.
Oh no, I don't. I think you've experienced it slightly a couple times.
Yeah, I mean, I would never say like slightly to where I'm like I don't want to talk or be your friend anymore, because obviously we do a podcast together.
Yeah, I can, like I said, I can be a little abrasive to some people who don't. My current boss right now, my current manager, I started working for him, and about 2 or 3 months in, he went to one of my coworkers, who's also a friend, and was like, "What's the deal with Mark? Is he this big of an asshole all the time?" And they just kind of laughed. It's like, no, he's very straightforward and he's very sarcastic. If you're that way with him, he's perfectly fine. And they figured it out it's just how I am. I'm just sarcastic and blunt and straightforward. So yeah, it's fun.
It's fine. You know, I think, you know, in all seriousness, like you have to pursue what is going to be the best for you. Like don't ever live up to expectations or validations from other people, because in the long run you're digging a grave for your mental health, so to say.
Yeah, and going the route that I did, as the way that I did it, you almost find out who's really a friend and who's not. The people that are trying to please everybody because they want everybody to like them are always worried about, are they really a friend? Do they really like me? What do I have to do to make them like me? I don't really have that much of an issue because I'm the same almost around everybody, and you either like me or you don't. It's not my problem, it's yours. So I don't have a lot of people that I'm around a lot, but the ones that I do have been around for a very long time.
Can confirm. Yeah, so I also just want to echo that as we're winding down, just, by saying, like, and sometimes also, like, it matters how you surround yourself with people, because I feel like sometimes we go through these cycles where we surround ourselves with people, and in surrounding ourselves with certain groups of people, we're unconsciously searching for that validation, right? So, like, we're trying to be around community just for the sake of community, and that's honestly dangerous. Like, we preach on here about how, like, the importance of community, and, like, how you should always, bless you, be experiencing community is, you want to... what you want to do is, like, surround yourself with people that are going to uplift you and, like, challenge you and actually do life with you. And there are people like Mark in my life, and people like Brandon and my wife, and that, and my friend Ronnie, that, like, and Micah, that so many people that, like, I've surrounded myself with this, like, tiny group of people that I'm like, I want to do life with you, and I will keep our friendship going at any cost. And because I enjoy conversating with these people, I enjoy making them laugh. I've been there during some times where they just need to vent. Mark knows this more recently. And so times where I just need to vent, and at the end of the day, like, make yourself around a community of people that are going to be as concerned about your mental health and your well-being as you are about theirs.
Yeah, and if you've got friends that you go that route and you cut your friends back and they just don't get that, hey, I'm not coming out to hang out tonight, I'm not going to go to this party because I need to stay home and chill, then how much of a friend really are they? If they can't understand that and respect your decision. So,
yeah, all of that to say that we got really derailed on Night Watch.
Good job, Josh.
But it's fine, because these are important conversations that we need to have, and they're one step closer. I have no idea what we're actually going to be doing for our next episode, but Mark, we have something special planned for Christmas. I do know that. But Mark, until then, where can people find you online?
I'm just a nerd painting miniatures on Instagram. Titanium Juggernaut Painting.
You guys can find me. I am basically almost exclusively right now on Letterboxd. It's at Captain Nostalgia. And you guys can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube as well. We just recently hit Twitch affiliate status, which is awesome. So thank you guys for that. And on top of that, you guys can also check us out wherever you guys get podcasts from. Be a part of our Patreon support group to help us get mental health resources into Comic Cons, horror cons, film festivals, and much more. All of those links are going to be in the show notes below. And we want to throw this out there as well. If you are a horror filmmaker, we are doing our very first ever film festival. All of the our tagline for it's called Horrific Hope Film Festival. It's going to be held April 30th at Winchester, Virginia, at the Alamo Draft House. Tickets won't go on sale for a couple months, but right now we are taking submissions and sponsors. So if you're interested in sponsoring us, we'll provide a contact link in the show notes below. But you guys can also check out our Film Freeway link where you guys can submit your both short film and feature film. And we are looking for we're looking to introduce the world to some awesome filmmakers. So until next time, we'll see you guys.
We're not going to rate the movie?
Oh, yeah. You want to rate the movie?
Yes.
Okay.
Because
I can rate the movie.
give it a 4 out of 5, and here you go.
Woo!
And give it like a 2.
Oh, man. I am not that predictable because I'm going to go 1.5.
Ah, that movie's so fun.
All right. Well, until next time, remember that the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you. Have a good night.